Do you believe that faithless electors might still make Hillary Clinton the next president of the United States? Do the names James Mattis, Rick Perry, or Scott Pruitt give you chills that last for more than 4 hours? Do you find yourself crying uncontrollably at Facebook memes featuring a small green frog? Then you might just be suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, or TDS. I'm Dr. Steve Green, and although I'm not a real doctor, I do play one on TV for BillWhittle.com, and I'm here to help. And making the rounds with me today, Dr. Bill Whittle and Dr. Scott Ott. Doctors, like a sudden outbreak of the flu, we see sufferers of Trump derangement syndrome all around us. They're huddled in the safe spaces of our major universities with their coloring books and their stuffed animals. We see them at holiday family gatherings, muttering wild accusations about how the president-elect will be sworn into office by Vladimir Putin. We even see them crying on the New York City subway. New York Magazine's David Wallace Wells had this to say about the morning after the election. The human traffic on the streets that next morning was funereal, but it did proceed. Commuters stuffed shoulder to shoulder on subway cars, crying. More amazing here, they were looking at each other in the eye as they bawled. There were hugs among strangers and many more bleary-eyed nods on streets that seemed dusted with ash. Now, the amazing thing about this article, other than the fact that it was written and published, is that none of it actually seems to have happened. Dr. Ott, the only time the streets of New York were dusted with ash was, of course, in the aftermath of the attacks of 9/11, not after a peaceful and orderly election. What treatment would you recommend for a TDS sufferer like Mr., and I use the term loosely, Wallace Wells?
Well, I'm pretty sure there's an ash in there somewhere. I think he happens to be the article of that, or the author of that article. It's funny because I have gone in completely the opposite direction, as is well documented here at Right Angle and elsewhere on the internets. I was a vigorous opponent of Donald Trump's both his nomination and his election. That said, it seems like each morning I wake up to the unlikeliest of good news. I mean, today, as we record this morning, I woke up and heard that Rick Perry was being appointed to run the agency that he couldn't recall that he wanted to eliminate. And I just thought, this is awesome. Rick Perry from Texas as the chief of the EPA, or the Energy Department, rather. And so, in many ways, I have been pleasantly surprised so far by the appointments. But I made a decision similar to my erstwhile colleague. What's his name? What's the guy who does the Daily Wire, the bald guy, Bill?
I have no knowledge of such a person.
Anyway, well, there's this guy out there that does this podcast called The Andrew Klavan Show, but I can't remember his name. Anyway, he and I have taken sort of the same approach to this, which is, okay, well, we weren't for him, but he's the guy now. Let's see what he does. Not just what he says, but let's see what he actually does. And in the concrete actions that President-elect Trump has taken so far, I have actually found those to be a sort of medication for my Trump derangement syndrome. Now, I think that any president, no matter whether you were for him or against him, deserves to let him run the line a little bit. Let him get out there, let him take the hook and go as far as he can, and let him hang himself if that's going to be the case. But so far, I'm getting an indication that at the very least, Trump is getting good advice and taking it. And these poor people who are still suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, I'm not saying you should all of a sudden jump on board the Trump train. I'm just saying, cool your jets for a second. Let's see what he really does.
Well, Scott Ott has taken his medicine, but not yet drunk the Kool-Aid. There's hope for him yet. Trump derangement syndrome can start with mild symptoms, such as chanting, "Not my president," or pinning a "I'm still with her" button on one's Facebook or Twitter profile. From there, the patient's condition and prognosis may deteriorate rapidly. Some female TDS victims have cut off their hair in protest, while others, mostly male, have threatened to secede from the Union as the nation of Pacifica or the city-state of New York. From there, paranoia sets in. First, they'll say the FBI stole the election from Hillary Clinton, who was under investigation by the FBI. Then they'll insist that the election wasn't stolen, but that fake news tricked people into voting for Donald Trump. And then they'll reverse course and say the election was indeed stolen after all, except that it was actually stolen by Russians. Dr. Whittle, we saw similar symptoms 16 years ago when Bush derangement syndrome raged all up and down the Atlantic seaboard and the West Coast. And here we are again in 2016. And yet we saw much smaller outbreaks, much smaller, of Obama derangement syndrome in 2008 and in 2012. What, in your medical opinion, inoculates some voters from the ravages of derangement while millions of others are both carriers and sufferers of this horrible disease?
Well, I have to admit I was relieved when you told me that the story didn't happen, because the thought of having complete strangers on the New York subway just crying at each other for a day made me just whipping myself that I hadn't been in New York. I mean, I was really just it's like you miss a meteor shower or something like that. You know, it's awesome. I wasn't there. But one of the reasons that they're suffering from it more than we were is because we hear their ideas every day, obviously, and they never get to hear ours. They don't recognize, they think that CNN is the center and that Fox News is this wild right-wing thing. They don't understand how far out of the American mainstream this brand of progressivism is. One of the things about Obama derangement syndrome that I tried to fight for the entire 8 years was when I would hear something that was actually a little bit ridiculous, like he's not going to cede power, he's going to basically just cancel the election. My response would be, listen, there's enough genuinely awful things that this guy does that we don't have to invent things. Let's just concentrate on what's real. One of the things that's so disgusting to me about this post-election period has been that every single day, not just Democratic voters or regular people on the street, but the highest levels of the Democratic Party are doing everything they can to delegitimize Trump before he even takes office. They're going to make him not really the president. And I would just like to say, if it turns out that that the FBI and the Russians cost Hillary Clinton the election, then I would like to constantly remind people that the FBI cost her the election because she broke federal law by having top secret information on an email server that was unsecure and eventually went onto the computer of a known pervert and so on. And secondly, if the Russians hacked the information in order to influence the election, where do you think they hacked it from, Hillary? Where do you think the easiest place to get all of your personal emails with John Podesta are from? What do you think the easiest thing they could have done in terms of getting that? This is the thing I want to take home with this, is that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats had no problem whatsoever, none, with top secret information being leaked to the Russians. None. They didn't care that intelligence operatives were in risk and in many cases going to be killed because of this. They didn't care of the threat to the national security. They didn't care about any of that. But they do care that it cost them the election. They do care that Hillary Clinton's remarks about Bernie Sanders happened to have been caught up and the rest of it and so on. Yeah. So I say, I hope your derangement syndrome continues and grows because you deserve it. You deserve to be this miserable. You have no right to claim the moral high ground after the kind of person that you nominated. And, elections have consequences, right? I won, right? All the things that he said are true. So maybe, in closing, maybe this idea of granting more and more and more power to the presidency and the federal government and governing like you're never going to lose again, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. If you want to talk about secession, congratulations. You now actually reached a point where you're actually thinking about things.
Now that's
by the way, Steve,
yes.
As an update for those suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, after the recount in Wisconsin, it turns out that Trump had a net gain of, I think it was like 171 votes or something like that. After they recounted them all, because of course Hillary Clinton was cheated, somehow Trump actually has more votes now.
It's so much better. God watches out for fools, drunks in the United States of America. Absolutely
Indeed.
True.
All right, doctors, I have some shocking medical news for you. According to the latest medical research conducted medically by me this morning in my bathrobe, there's nothing at all deranged about Trump derangement syndrome. All of this irrationality, the panic, the safe spaces, the delusions, all of this irrationality is a perfectly rational response for those on the left to the election of Donald Trump. To see why, let's go to New York writer Ashley Black's Twitter stream. Last week she said, "Everyone Trump has picked wants to dismantle the agency they will be running. That's it. No punchline." Now, our progressive friends, those adult
Hooray.
victims of Trump derangement syndrome, they really believe that President Trump and his incoming cabinet intend to derail the left's $1 trillion gravy train. Now, Is that really crazy? Or is it just what the doctor ordered? Something to think about. And that's The Right Angle on TDS, brought to you by the totally underage members of BillWhittle.com. Well, except for a few of them. They know who they are. Thanks to them for making this possible, and thanks to you for your time.